Notorious now, the Yakuza can find its origins in very humble beginnings. Formed originally of peddlers, traveling salesmen, gamblers, convicts, and other misfits of society, these men found it beneficial to band together. In these groups, protection was considered a commodity. Problems within the state with gambling led to the forming of gambling organizations. During the Tokugawa period from 1600 to 1867, these groups were known as bakuto. Initially, the government placed harsh restrictive penalties on the bakuto, though as time progressed, more pragmatic policies were put into place. Cooperation became the order of the day. Bakuto were integrated within the government and even used as spies. During this period, the bakuto flourished. Bosses became prominent figures, a stark difference from their origins in the lower class. These men acted as gateways between the upper shogunate world and the lower classes which were required for labor. The unification of Japan under the Tokugawa at the beginning of the 17th century brought to an end centuries of warfare and revolt. With peace came a crisis for the large and economically useless warrior class. Many and most samurai responded by becoming bureaucrats and scholars, while others reacted to the change by forming gangs, known as the Hamakoto Yaku. More significant than their outrageous dress and hair or their devotion to martial arts was their frequent outrages against ordinary townspeople and the terror they inflicted upon them. To counteract these violent outrages by the servants of the shogun, the bakuto organized a civil defense group composed of gamblers, laborers, and local firemen to counteract these actions. These groups became known as the machiyaku, otherwise known as servants of the town. While the legitimacy of the Yakuza's connection with the Robin Hood-like machiyaku may be disputed, their influence during times of national unrest cannot be. During the struggle for supremacy between the decaying regime of the Tokugawa and the pro-imperial faction, the larger bakuto groups, with their reserves of fighting men, became important political forces. Certain members of the bakuto were even given police responsibilities to guard the nation's highways to allow merchants to pass. Jirocho, a notorious bakuto boss, had all of his past crimes pardoned and was even granted the right to wear swords, a very big deal in that era, only in return for his military support. Despite these alliances, the Meiji government in 1884 implemented the Ordinance for the Treatment of Gambling Crimes, once again cracking down on the bakuto. But their control did not last long. Wars with China in 1894 and Russia in 1905 allowed for a revival in the fortunes of gambling groups. During this time, the Yakuza became linked with military and political leaders. The later American occupation of Japan left the police jilted and the underworld thrived. Surviving on the rations imposed by the occupying Americans was becoming increasingly impossible. The only markets that had food were under Yakuza control. Only 2 months after Japanese surrender, it was estimated that there were 17,000 such markets throughout the country. Eventually, though, the government did take over markets and gambling, forcing the Yakuza to diversify. The Yakuza offered the only mobility to men born of lower castes during the feudalistic Tokugawa shogunate and Meiji periods. This allure, as well as their constant evolution, has ensured the Yakuza a place in Japanese society.